Tom had worn that watch every single day for 19 years. It was his father's, the last thing his father ever gave him. Yesterday, he walked into a pawn shop and sold it without looking back. His daughter's school fees were due, and there was no other way. He told her he lost it. She believed him. Then the next morning his phone rang. It was the school principal, and the first thing she said was not good morning. If this story stays with you, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from, and please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Tom Briggs was the kind of man who fixed things quietly and never mentioned he had fixed them. He fixed the neighbor's fence after the storm last October and left before she came outside to thank him. He fixed the leaking pipe under the kitchen sink at 2 in the morning so Gracie would not wake up to a cold floor. He had been fixing things quietly for 10 years, since the morning Gracie was 3 days old and her mother decided she was not ready, and he drove home from the hospital alone with a car seat in the back and a daughter who needed everything. He had rebuilt it, quietly, without fuss, without asking for anything he did not have to ask for. He was a delivery driver. He worked 6 days a week. He showed up. The watch had been on his left wrist every single day for 19 years. His father gave it to him on his 18th birthday, pressed it across the kitchen table before either of them had said a word that morning, the way his father did most important things, without ceremony, just the thing itself and the weight of it. It was silver, plain-faced, with a small notch of a scratch just below the 3 on the dial. His father had it repaired after Tom dropped it off his bicycle at 12, but the repairman could not quite get the scratch out, and his father had looked at it and said he was glad, because it proved the watch had lived. Tom had worn it through his father's funeral, through Gracie's first steps, through every 6 o'clock alarm, and every long road, and every quiet evening, in the small house, where the two of them had made something that felt, most days, like enough. The school fee notice had been on the kitchen counter for 2 weeks, the bottom right corner curling from being picked up and put down so many times. $420, due by the 15th, for the spring semester enrichment program that Gracie had been accepted into after her teacher submitted her name without telling him. He found out the same day the notice arrived, Gracie sitting across from him at dinner, practically vibrating with excitement about the science projects and the field trips, and he had said, "That's amazing, bug," and meant it entirely, and he had looked at the notice after she went to bed and done the math 3 different ways and gotten the same answer each time. At breakfast on the Thursday before the deadline, Gracie looked at him over her cereal and asked if the fees were sorted. He told her it was handled. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, steady and careful, the way she had been looking at him since she was 4, and figured out that handled did not always mean what it sounded like. She went back to her cereal. He refilled his coffee and did not look at the counter. He drove to Haverstock Pawn on his lunch break. He had looked it up 2 days before, closed the tab, then looked it up again the next morning. The shop smelled of dust and old metal, and the man behind the counter had the practiced eyes of someone who had seen every version of necessity walk through his door and learned not to comment on any of it. Tom set the watch on the glass counter. The man looked at it, turned it over, noted the scratch, offered a number. Tom said fine. He did not negotiate. He took the envelope of cash, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked to the door. He did not look back at the watch through the window. He had decided on the way over that he would not do that, and he kept the decision. He paid the fees from his phone in the car park and sat for a few minutes after, engine off, looking at the pale strip on his wrist where the watch had been, the skin there, slightly lighter, from 19 years of shade. Then he started the engine and drove the rest of his route and delivered 14 packages and came home and made pasta and did not think about it, or tried not to, which is a different thing entirely. Gracie noticed at the table. She looked at his wrist the way children look at things when they are deciding whether to say anything, openly but carefully. "Where's your watch, Dad?" she asked. Tom glanced down, as if he had only just noticed. "Think I left it somewhere at work," he said. "I'll find it." She looked at him once more, and then looked down at her pasta, and did not ask again. That night after she was in bed, Tom sat at the kitchen table with the fee receipt in front of him, and his phone lit up with an unknown number at 9:30, and he let it ring because it was late and he was tired, and he told himself, whatever it was could wait until morning. It could not wait until morning. Tom answered the phone at 7:15, standing at the counter, making Gracie's lunch, a cheese sandwich with the crusts cut off, because she had asked him to stop cutting the crusts 3 months ago, and he kept forgetting. He wiped his hands on his jeans and answered. The voice on the other end was calm and measured, the kind of voice that has spent years delivering news of all kinds to parents, and learned to stay steady, regardless of what the news is. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "my name is Mrs. Aldridge. I'm the principal at Gracie's school. I'm sorry to call so early." Tom set down the butter knife. In his experience, a call from the principal at 7:15 in the morning was never a not bad time. He told her it was fine. She thanked him and said she was calling about the school fees. Tom's grip on the phone tightened. He had the receipt on the table 2 feet from him. He had paid them. He had the confirmation email. Whatever this was, he had done it correctly. "I received the payment," Mrs. Aldridge said quickly. "That's not why I'm calling." "I'm calling because of how you paid them." Tom said nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. From down the hall came the soft thud of Gracie's school bag being lifted, the creak of her wardrobe. "I think it would be better if we talked in person," Mrs. Aldridge said. "Could you come in this morning, before drop-off?" Tom drove Gracie to school the way he always did, radio on low, her talking about the spelling test that afternoon, and the one word she always got wrong, no matter how many times she said it out loud. He listened and responded, and gave none of what was sitting in his chest any room in his face. When they pulled up at the gate, she climbed out and turned back and looked at him through the open window for just a second longer than usual. "Have a good day, Dad," she said. He told her he would. He watched her go through the gate and waited until she turned the corner before he let his face do what it had been waiting to do since 7:15. Mrs. Aldridge's office was small and warm, with a rubber plant in the corner, and children's artwork across the wall behind her desk. She shook Tom's hand, asked him to sit, and poured him a cup of tea he had not asked for, and he was grateful for both the tea and the not being asked. On the desk between them, face up with the scratch catching the morning light, was his father's watch. Tom sat very still and looked at it and did not touch it. She explained it quietly and without drama. One of the school's teachers, Mr. Okafor, ran a weekend market stall and had bought a silver watch from a pawn shop 2 days ago. He had brought it to school to show a colleague. Gracie had walked past the staff room door, glanced through the glass, and stopped completely. She had not gone in. She had not said anything. She had simply looked at the watch on the table and then walked on to her classroom without breaking her stride. But Mr. Okafor had seen her face through the glass in that half-second before she composed it, and he had known immediately what he was looking at. He had gone to Mrs. Aldridge that afternoon with the watch and said he would not take any money for it. He had 2 daughters of his own. He understood what kind of man sells something without looking back at the window. He just wanted it returned. Mrs. Aldridge slid the watch across the desk, and Tom picked it up and turned it over and ran his thumb across the scratch and said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing that would have fit inside the room without breaking something. He put it back on his wrist. The pale strip of skin disappeared, and the weight of it settled into the groove it had worn over 19 years, familiar and entirely itself. "There is something else," Mrs. Aldridge said, folding her hands on the desk. "The school has a hardship fund. Quiet. No paperwork. No record. The fees will be refunded to you by end of week, and Gracie's place is not affected." Tom opened his mouth, and she held up one hand gently. "But before you say anything, I need to tell you something about yesterday afternoon. Something Gracie did that you don't know about yet. If you have ever quietly done something for your child that you hoped they would never find out about, drop a comment below. We are not here to judge. We are simply here together." Tom sat in the small, warm office with the watch back on his wrist and waited. Mrs. Aldridge was the kind of person who did not rush the important parts, who understood that some sentences needed a moment of space around them before they were said, and he was grateful for that too. The same way he was grateful for the tea. Outside the window, the schoolyard was filling up with the morning noise of children arriving, bags scraping, voices layered over each other in that particular outdoor frequency that only exists around schools. Tom looked at the watch, at the scratch, and waited. Gracie had come to the principal's office the previous afternoon. On her own, Mrs. Aldridge said. No teacher had sent her. No note had been written. She had simply appeared at the office door at 2:30, knocked twice the way she had clearly been taught to knock, and asked the woman at the front desk whether she could speak with Mrs. Aldridge when she had a moment. She was told Mrs. Aldridge was in a meeting. Gracie said she would wait. She sat in the chair outside the office with her school bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and she waited for 25 minutes until Mrs. Aldridge came out. And when she did, Gracie stood up and asked very politely whether she could have a few minutes, please. Tom pressed his thumb against the scratch on the watch face and did not say anything. He was picturing Gracie sitting in that chair, 10 years old, school bag in her lap, waiting with her hands folded. It was the most Gracie thing he had ever heard. It was also the thing that was going to undo him completely, if he was not careful. So he breathed, and he waited, and he let Mrs. Aldridge continue. Inside the office, Gracie had sat down across from Mrs. Aldridge and asked, in the careful, direct way she asked things when she had thought them through in advance, whether the school had any way of helping families who were going through a hard time financially. She did not say her father's name. She did not say fees. She did not explain how she knew what she knew or how long she had known it. She simply asked the question, clearly and without drama, and then sat very still and waited for the answer. Mrs. Aldridge had told her yes. The school had a fund for exactly that situation, and Gracie had nodded once, said thank you very much, picked up her school bag, and walked back out to the corridor. The whole conversation had lasted 4 minutes. Tom looked at the rubber plant in the corner of the office. He was not going to hold his face together much longer, and he knew it, and was trying to buy a little more time. He thought about Gracie at the kitchen table, asking if the fees were sorted, and accepting handled without pushing, not because she believed him, but because she had already decided what she was going to do about it herself. She had seen the pale strip on his wrist the evening he came home without the watch, understood immediately, said nothing to protect him, and gone to school the next morning and walked into the principal's office alone. She was 10 years old. She had done all of that alone. She also asked Mr. Okafor not to tell you she had recognized the watch, Mrs. Aldridge said, and that was the sentence that did it. Tom put his hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the same way he had looked at the ceiling the night Gracie was brought home from the hospital, and he had stood in the dark hallway with her in his arms and understood the full weight of what the next 20 years were going to ask of him. She had seen the watch through the staff room glass and composed her face and walked to her classroom, and then, at some point, quietly, found Mr. Okafor and asked him not to say anything to her father about the fact that she had recognized it. She had been protecting him in both directions at once. Tom thanked Mrs. Aldridge and walked out of the office and down the corridor and through the double doors into the schoolyard. The morning was cold and bright and loud, and he stood at the edge of it for a moment. Then he saw Gracie near the climbing frame, standing with 2 friends, laughing at something, her bag on both shoulders, her hair in the same slightly uneven ponytail she always did herself, because she had decided a year ago she was old enough to do it herself. She had not seen him yet. He watched her laugh. This 10-year-old girl who had sold nothing, fixed nothing, and quietly arranged everything. And he thought about his father keeping the scratch because it proved the watch had lived, and Tom thought he was right, and he thought it was true of more things than watches, and he raised his hand and waited for her to turn around. Gracie turned around, the way she always turned when she felt him looking, not because she heard anything, but because she always seemed to know. She saw him at the edge of the yard, and her face did the thing it did when she was deciding whether to act surprised or just be honest. And she chose honest. She said something to her friends and walked across the yard toward him, her bag bouncing slightly, and when she reached him, she looked at his wrist, where the watch was sitting exactly where it always sat, and then looked back at his face. Tom crouched down to her level. "You went to see Mrs. Aldridge," he said. Gracie looked at him steadily. "The fees were due," she said, as if that were the whole explanation, as if it were. He pulled her into a hug, right there in the yard, which she had told him 2 years ago was fine at school pickup, but could he please not make it too long, because her friends would see. He held on a little longer than allowed, and she let him, which told him everything about what she understood about the morning. When he let go, she straightened her bag straps and looked at his wrist, and then back at his face. "Did Mr. Okafor tell you I saw it?" she asked. Tom nodded. Her expression flickered between something that was not quite annoyance and not quite relief. "I asked him not to," she said. "Tom said he knew, but I'm glad he did," he said. She considered that and gave a small nod, the kind that means "I suppose that's fair." Then she went back to her friends. He drove home and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the watch for a long time. He thought about his father, gone 9 years now, who had pressed the watch across the table on a morning neither of them made into a ceremony, because that was not how they did things. He thought about what his father would have made of Gracie, her steady, careful logic, her habit of deciding what needed doing and then doing it without consultation, her complete lack of drama about any of it. He thought his father would have recognized something in her immediately, the same quality he had always recognized in Tom, the particular stubbornness of people who show up. He called the school in the afternoon and asked for Mr. Okafor. The man who answered was warm and unhurried, and when Tom tried to say thank you, Mr. Okafor stopped him with the gentle firmness of someone who had thought carefully about how this should go. "I have 2 daughters," he said. "When I saw your girl's face through that glass, I knew what I was looking at. That's all. You don't need to thank me for that." Tom sat with the phone to his ear and thought that some things cannot be thanked for, not because the gratitude is not real, but because it is too large to fit inside a thank you, and both people already know it. He picked Gracie up at the usual time. She came through the gate still talking to her friend, said goodbye, climbed into the car, dropped her bag at her feet, and put her seatbelt on. She did not mention the watch, or Mrs. Aldridge, or the chair outside the principal's office, where she had waited with her hands folded for 25 minutes. She asked what was for dinner, and he said pasta, and she accepted this with the philosophical resignation of someone who has made peace with the pasta situation. He made dinner, and she did homework at the kitchen table, the radio on low, the way it always was, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, filling the small house. After they ate, she helped wash up without being asked, and when they were done, she dried her hands on the tea towel and looked at the watch on his wrist, and then up at him. "Dad," she said, "do you think Granddad would have liked me?" The question arrived so quietly that Tom just stood there for a moment, with the dishcloth in his hand. He looked at his daughter, 10 years old, tea towel still in her hands, and he did not think about the answer, because the answer had always been there. The years had been heavy and long, and without question, the best thing that had ever happened to him. "He would have been crazy about you, Bug," Tom said. "Absolutely crazy about you." She smiled the small, private smile she kept for things that mattered but did not need to be made large, hung the tea towel back on the hook, and went to finish her homework. Tom looked at the scratch on his father's watch and thought about things that prove they have lived, and thought the list was longer than he had ever given it credit for. If this story moved you, subscribe and stay close, because the stories that matter most are always the quietest ones, and we will keep finding them for you every single week.